Before we begin, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile interrogation room at the Seattle Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division. Detective Michael Torres sat across from a woman who seemed almost too composed for someone accused of taking another person's life. Her name was Diana Foster, a 34-year-old marketing executive with an impeccable record until 3 days ago, when the body of her former business partner, Jessica Hammond, was discovered in the basement of their shared office building. Jessica Hammond, 32, had been found on the morning of October 28, 2025, by the building's maintenance supervisor. The victim had been strangled, her body carefully positioned as if she was sleeping, her hands folded across her chest. The medical examiner estimated she had been dead for approximately 18 hours before discovery, placing the time of death sometime during the evening of October 27th. Detective Torres reviewed the file one more time before beginning the interrogation. He was a 15-year veteran of the force, known for his methodical approach and ability to read people. His partner, Detective Lisa Huang, watched through the one-way mirror, ready to intervene if needed. Diana sat perfectly still, her designer blazer unwrinkled, despite the hours she had spent in custody. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her makeup remained flawless. She maintained eye contact with the detective, her expression neutral, almost pleasant. "Miss Foster," Detective Torres began, his voice steady and professional. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. You understand that you're here voluntarily and that you can request an attorney at any time." "I understand completely, Detective," Diana replied, her voice smooth and controlled. "I have nothing to hide. Jessica was my friend and business partner. I want to help you find out what happened to her." The detective nodded slowly, making a note on his legal pad. "Can you tell me about your relationship with Jessica Hammond?" Diana leaned back slightly in her chair, crossing her legs at the ankle. "Jessica and I met 7 years ago at a marketing conference in Portland. We both worked for different agencies at the time, but we had similar visions about the industry. We stayed in touch, and about 4 years ago, we decided to start our own firm together, Hammond and Foster Marketing Solutions." "And how would you describe your working relationship?" Torres asked, his pen hovering over the paper. "Professional," Diana answered quickly. "We had our disagreements, like any business partners do, but we respected each other. We complemented each other well. Jessica was the creative mind, always coming up with innovative campaigns. I handled the business side, client relations, contracts, that sort of thing." Detective Torres flipped through several pages in his folder. "According to your employees, there had been some tension between you and Ms. Hammond in recent months. Can you elaborate on that?" For the first time, Diana's expression shifted slightly. A brief flicker of something passed across her face before she regained her composure. "Every business goes through challenging periods, Detective. We were facing some financial pressures. A few clients had decided not to renew their contracts. Jessica wanted to take the company in a direction I didn't agree with. She wanted us to expand rapidly, take on investors, essentially give up our independence. I believed we should consolidate, focus on our core strengths. That sounds like more than a minor disagreement," Torres observed, watching her carefully. Diana's lips curved into a slight smile. "Business is competitive, Detective. Disagreements are normal. They don't lead to violence. Where were you on the evening of October 27th, between the hours of 6 p.m. and midnight?" "I was at the office until around 7:30, Diana said without hesitation. "I was working on a presentation for a potential client meeting scheduled for the following week. After that, I went home, made dinner, and watched television. I live alone, so I can't provide you with an alibi, if that's what you're asking." Detective Torres made another note. Did you see Jessica that evening? Yes, briefly. She was in her office when I left. She said she was going to work late on a new pitch. That was the last time I saw her alive. What was her demeanor when you saw her? Diana paused, appearing to consider the question carefully. She seemed normal. Maybe a bit stressed, but that was typical for her. Jessica always put a lot of pressure on herself to deliver perfect work. The detective leaned forward slightly. Ms. Foster, we have security footage from the building that shows you returning to the office at 9:15 p.m. on October 27th. You told us you went home at 7:30. Can you explain that discrepancy? Diana's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the armrest of her chair. I forgot some files I needed for the presentation. I went back to get them. You were in the building for 43 minutes. That's a long time to retrieve some files. I decided to work a bit more while I was there, Diana said smoothly. I had my laptop at home, but some of the reference materials I needed were in my office filing cabinet. It seemed more efficient to work there for a while than to go back and forth. Detective Torres pulled out a photograph from his folder and placed it on the table between them. It showed a close-up of bruising on Jessica Hammond's neck, consistent with manual strangulation. Ms. Foster, the medical examiner determined that Jessica was strangled. The person who did this would have had to maintain pressure on her throat for several minutes. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was personal. Intimate even? Diana looked at the photograph without flinching. That's horrible, truly horrible. But I don't understand what you're implying, Detective. I'm not implying anything. I'm presenting facts. Jessica Hammond was in her office on the evening of October 27th. You returned to the building that evening. The next morning, she was found dead in the basement. You were one of only 3 people with access to the basement storage area. The other 2 were out of town that entire week. Correlation isn't causation, Detective, Diana said, her voice taking on an edge for the first time. You're building a circumstantial case based on proximity and opportunity. That's not evidence. Torres leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're right. Let me tell you what else we found. We discovered traces of Jessica's DNA under your fingernails, skin cells specifically, the kind that would be present if you had grabbed someone forcefully. Can you explain that? Diana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jessica and I had a disagreement that afternoon. It got heated. She grabbed my arm and I pushed her hand away. That's probably when the transfer occurred. What was this disagreement about? The same thing we'd been arguing about for months, the direction of the company. Jessica had been meeting with potential investors behind my back. I found out about it that day. I was angry, yes, but I didn't hurt her. Detective Torres pulled out another document. We also found your fingerprints on a scarf that was discovered near Jessica's body, a Hermes scarf, quite distinctive, blue and gold pattern. Do you recognize it? Diana's eyes narrowed slightly. That's my scarf. Jessica borrowed it a few weeks ago because she said it would look good with an outfit she was planning to wear to a client dinner. She never returned it. If it was near her body, she must have still had it. The interesting thing about this scarf, Torres continued, his voice measured, is that the medical examiner believes it may have been used as part of the strangulation. The pattern of the bruising on Jessica's neck matches the width and texture of the scarf's fabric. For a long moment, Diana said nothing. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the barely audible scratch of Torres's pen on paper as he made notes. Finally, Diana spoke, her voice quieter than before. You're trying to construct a narrative where I'm the villain, Detective. But you're missing the bigger picture. Jessica had enemies, business competitors who resented our success. Ex-employees who felt they hadn't been treated fairly, a former romantic partner who became obsessive after their relationship ended. "We've investigated all of those angles," Torres said. "None of them were in Seattle at the time of Jessica's demise. None of them had access to your building. None of them had their DNA under Jessica's fingernails or their belongings used in the commission of the crime." Diana's fingers drummed once on the armrest, a brief break in her controlled demeanor. "Then you're not looking hard enough." Detective Torres closed his folder and folded his hands on top of it. "Ms. Foster, I've been doing this job for a long time. I've interviewed hundreds of people sitting in that exact chair. Some were innocent, terrified by the situation they found themselves in. Others were guilty, struggling to maintain their composure while their world collapsed around them. You don't seem particularly distressed by any of this. In fact, you seem almost clinical in your responses. Why is that?" Diana met his gaze steadily. "Because I'm innocent, Detective. I have faith in the system. I know that eventually the truth will come out and I'll be exonerated. Getting emotional won't change the facts." "Or perhaps," Torres suggested quietly, "you're not distressed because you already know exactly what happened. You don't need to wonder or worry because you were there. You know Jessica didn't suffer. You know it was quick. You know she probably didn't see it coming because she trusted you." Diana's eyes flashed with something unreadable. "You're wrong." "Then help me understand. Walk me through that evening again. Every detail. Because right now, all the evidence points to you." Diana exhaled slowly, her fingers now gripping the armrest more tightly. "I told you. I went back to get files. I worked in my office. I didn't go to Jessica's office. I didn't see her again after I left at 7:30. The security cameras tell a different story," Torres said, pulling out several printed screenshots from the folder. "These show you walking past the elevator toward the basement stairs at 9:32 p.m. You weren't heading toward your office. You were heading toward the basement." Diana stared at the images, her face unreadable. "I was throwing away some old files. We kept a recycling bin for sensitive documents in the basement." "In the middle of the night? That couldn't wait until morning." "I was already there. It was convenient." Detective Torres stood up slowly and walked around the table, positioning himself where Diana would have to turn her head to look at him. "Ms. Foster, we also found something else. Jessica's phone records show she sent a text message to someone at 9:18 p.m. The message said, 'We need to talk. Tonight. This can't wait.' The phone number she sent it to belongs to you." Diana's shoulders tensed slightly. "I didn't receive any text from Jessica that night." "Your phone records show otherwise, and you responded at 9:21 p.m. You said, 'Fine, basement in 10 minutes. Does that refresh your memory?" The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Diana's carefully constructed facade began to show hairline cracks. Her breathing, previously controlled and even, became slightly irregular. Her eyes, which had maintained steady contact with the detective, now darted briefly toward the door before returning to Torres. "I want a lawyer," Diana finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Torres nodded slowly. "That's your right, Ms. Foster. But before your attorney arrives, let me tell you what I think happened. I think Jessica confronted you that evening about something serious. Maybe she discovered something about the business finances. Maybe she was planning to buy you out, and you couldn't accept losing everything you'd built. You agreed to meet her in the basement where there were no cameras. The argument escalated. You grabbed your scarf, which she was wearing or had with her, and in a moment of rage or calculation, you strangled her. Then you carefully staged the scene to make it look like she had been placed there after the fact, hoping to throw off the investigation." Diana's face had gone pale, but she remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The thing about these cases," Torres continued, his voice almost conversational now, is that they're rarely as complicated as people think. Usually the simplest explanation is the correct one. You had motive, you had opportunity, you had means, and now we have physical evidence tying you to the scene and the victim. I want my lawyer, Diana repeated, her voice stronger this time. I'm not saying anything else without legal representation. Detective Torres returned to his seat and gathered his papers. Of course, we'll make sure you have access to a phone. But, Ms. Foster, before I leave this room, I want you to think about something. Jessica Hammond's family deserves answers. They deserve justice, and deep down, I think you know that carrying this burden alone is going to destroy you eventually. Confession can be a powerful form of release. Diana's eyes met his one final time, and for just a moment, something flickered in their depths. Regret? Defiance? Fear? Torres couldn't quite tell. Then the mask slid back into place, and Diana Foster became once again the composed, controlled woman who had walked into the interrogation room hours earlier. I have nothing to confess to, Detective, she said quietly, because I didn't do this. Torres stood and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. We'll see, Miss Foster. We'll see. 3 hours had passed since Diana Foster invoked her right to legal counsel. Her attorney, Marcus Webb, a sharp, featured man in his late 40s, with a reputation for defending white-collar criminals, sat beside her now. The atmosphere in the interrogation room had shifted. Where before there had been a certain tension, now there was a calculated coldness. Detective Torres returned with Detective Huang, who carried an additional folder bulging with documents. They settled into their chairs across from Diana and her lawyer, the metal table between them like a barrier separating two opposing forces. Ms. Foster, Torres began, nodding respectfully toward the attorney. Mr. Webb, thank you for joining us. We have some additional information that's come to light during the past few hours, and we'd like to give Miss Foster the opportunity to address it. Marcus Webb adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and spoke in a measured tone. My client maintains her innocence, Detective. Unless you have something substantially new to present, I'm not sure this conversation will be productive. Detective Huang leaned forward, opening her folder. We've been going through the financial records of Hammond and Foster Marketing Solutions, with a warrant, of course. What we discovered is quite interesting. Ms. Foster, were you aware that your business was on the verge of bankruptcy? Diana's expression remained neutral, but her attorney's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The company was facing challenges, Diana acknowledged carefully. As I mentioned earlier, we had lost some clients. It was more than that, Huang continued, pulling out several spreadsheets. Over the past 8 months, approximately $270,000 disappeared from the company's operating accounts. Small withdrawals, carefully spaced out, but when we examined the pattern it became clear. Someone was systematically draining the business. Marcus Webb held up a hand. If you're suggesting my client engaged in embezzlement, you'll need to provide concrete evidence of that claim. We have it, Torres said, sliding a bank statement across the table. These withdrawals all require dual authorization according to your company's banking policies. Both partners had to approve transactions over $5,000, but we discovered something interesting. Jessica Hammond's digital signature on these authorization forms was forged. A forensic analysis of the electronic documents shows they were all created from the same IP address, an IP address that traces back to Ms. Foster's home network. Diana's hand moved to her throat, fingers touching the collar of her blouse before she caught herself and lowered her hand back to the table. Jessica discovered the embezzlement, didn't she? Torres pressed. That's what the confrontation on October 27th was really about. She had finally figured out what you'd been doing. She was going to report you to the authorities. Everything you'd worked for was about to come crashing down. Your reputation, your career, your freedom. All of it gone. This is speculation, Webb interjected sharply. Financial irregularities, even if proven, don't establish motive for such a serious accusation. Detective Huang pulled out another document. We also found drafts of an email on Jessica Hammond's computer. She never sent it, but the content is telling. It's addressed to the Seattle District Attorney's Office. In it, she details her discovery of the embezzlement and provides evidence of Ms. Foster's financial crimes. The document was last modified on October 27th at 6:47 p.m., just hours before Jessica was found deceased. Diana's breathing had become noticeably shallower. Beside her, Marcus Webb was writing rapidly on a legal pad, his expression grave. "Jessica confronted you that afternoon, didn't she?" Torres continued. "She told you what she'd discovered. She gave you a chance to explain yourself, but there was no explanation that would make this right. You'd stolen from your own company, from your own partner, and Jessica, despite your friendship, despite everything you'd built together, was going to turn you in. She had too much integrity to do anything else. My client doesn't have to respond to your narrative construction," Webb said firmly, "unless you have actual evidence placing Ms. Foster at the scene during the time of the victim's demise. This is all circumstantial." Detective Huang smiled grimly. "We do, actually. We brought in a specialist to analyze the security footage more carefully. There's a blind spot in the basement where the cameras don't quite reach. But what we did find was footage of Ms. Foster entering the basement at 9:34 p.m., just as she admitted. What she didn't mention was that she was carrying something. A bag. When she left the basement at 10:17 p.m., she was no longer carrying that bag. I disposed of old files, Diana said, her voice tight. That's what I told you. We searched the basement recycling bins, Huang replied. We found the bag. It's a distinctive canvas tote with your company's logo on it. Inside, we found your scarf, the one with Jessica's DNA on it, the one that was used to strangle her. You tried to dispose of it, but you didn't account for the fact that our crime scene technicians would search every inch of that basement. The color drained from Diana's face. Marcus Webb's pen stopped moving across the paper. There's something else, Torres said quietly. We found a strand of hair caught in the clasp of a bracelet Jessica was wearing. The DNA matches yours, Ms. Foster. And based on the root structure, the forensic specialist determined it was forcibly removed, consistent with a physical struggle. Diana's hands had begun to tremble. She clasped them together in her lap, trying to maintain her composure, but the cracks in her facade were widening. The evidence is overwhelming, Huang said, her voice not unkind. We know you were there. We know you had motive. We know you tried to cover up what happened. What we want to understand now is why. Help us understand what happened that night. Marcus Webb leaned close to Diana, whispering urgently in her ear. She shook her head slightly, then whispered something back. The attorney's expression became pained, conflicted. Detective, Webb said slowly, I need a moment alone with my client. Of course, Torres replied, standing. Both detectives left the room, leaving Diana alone with her attorney. Through the one-way mirror, the detectives watched as an intense conversation unfolded. Diana's careful composure finally shattered. Her shoulders shook as she buried her face in her hands. Marcus Webb sat rigid, his expression a mixture of concern and professional calculation. 20 minutes later, the detectives returned to the room. Diana's eyes were red-rimmed, but she had regained some measure of control. She sat up straighter, her hands folded on the table in front of her. My client wishes to make a statement, Webb said carefully. But first, I want to discuss the possibility of a plea arrangement. Given the circumstances and assuming my client's cooperation, we believe there may be grounds for considering reduced charges. Torres exchanged a glance with Huang. We can certainly discuss that with the district attorney's office, but we need complete honesty, no more half-truths or omissions. Diana nodded slowly, then began to speak, her voice hoarse. Jessica did confront me that afternoon. She'd hired a forensic accountant without telling me. When the audit came back showing the discrepancies, she was devastated. Not just angry, but hurt. She felt betrayed. "Why did you take the money?" Huang asked gently. Diana's laugh was bitter, sharp. "Because I was drowning. My mother has advanced dementia. She's in a private facility that costs $12,000 a month. Insurance covers almost nothing. My father passed away 5 years ago and I'm an only child. There was no one else. I tried to keep up with the payments using my salary, but it wasn't enough. I started taking small amounts from the business, telling myself I'd pay it back. But it snowballed. Every month, another withdrawal, another lie to cover the last one." "Did you tell Jessica this when she confronted you?" Torres asked. "I tried, but she was so angry, so disappointed. She said I should have come to her, that we could have figured something out together. But by then, it was too late. The damage was done. She showed me the draft email she'd prepared for the authorities. She said she was giving me 24 hours to turn myself in voluntarily before she sent it." Diana paused, her breathing ragged. "I left the office that evening thinking maybe I could convince her to give me more time. Maybe I could borrow money from somewhere, pay back what I'd taken. I went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, around 9, I texted her. Asked if we could talk. She agreed to meet me in the basement where we could have privacy." The room fell silent. Even the humming of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade into the background as everyone waited for Diana to continue. When I got there, Jessica was already waiting. She had printed out all the evidence, bank statements, the forged authorizations, everything. She laid it all out on one of the storage boxes and said, "This is what you're going to tell the police. No more delays. No more excuses." I begged her. I told her about my mother, about how I couldn't go to prison, about how I'd pay everything back. But Jessica was unmoved. She said I'd made my choices and now I had to face the consequences. Diana's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I don't remember deciding to do it. One moment we were arguing and the next my hands were around her throat. She tried to push me away, scratched at my arms, but I'm stronger than I look." I held on. I kept thinking, if she's gone, the evidence goes away, the threat goes away, everything can go back to normal. A single tear traced down Diana's cheek, but her expression remained oddly detached, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. Jessica's eyes went wide. She couldn't breathe. She tried to say something, but no sound came out. It felt like it went on forever, but it probably only lasted a few minutes. When she finally stopped struggling, I realized what I'd done. I panicked. I saw my scarf, the one she'd been wearing as a headband, and I used it to make sure, to be certain. Detective Huang had gone pale, but she maintained her professional composure. "What did you do after?" "I arranged her body to look peaceful. I know that sounds insane, but in that moment it felt important. She'd been my friend once, before everything fell apart. Then I gathered up all the evidence she'd printed out, stuffed it in my tote bag, along with the scarf, and put it in the recycling bin, buried under other documents. I thought no one would look there. I thought if I just stayed calm and played the grieving partner, eventually the investigation would go cold." Torres leaned forward. "But you knew we'd figure it out eventually." Diana laughed then, a sound that started soft, but grew louder, more unhinged. It was a laugh devoid of humor, filled instead with something darker, hysteria perhaps, or the final breaking of whatever had held her together. "I knew," she said through her laughter. "From the moment I walked out of that basement, I knew it was only a matter of time. You always catch people like me, don't you? The amateur criminals who think they're smart enough to get away with it. I'm a marketing executive, not a mastermind. I couldn't even embezzle successfully. How did I think I could cover up something like this? The laughter continued, rising and falling in waves. Marcus Webb looked deeply uncomfortable, reaching out to place a steadying hand on his client's arm, but Diana barely seemed to notice. The funny thing is, Diana continued, her laughter finally subsiding into something closer to sobbing, my mother doesn't even recognize me anymore. I destroyed my life, ended Jessica's life, all to pay for care for someone who doesn't know I exist. The irony is almost beautiful, isn't it? Detective Torres signaled to someone outside the room. Within moments, 2 uniformed officers entered. "Diana Foster," Torres said formally, standing, "you're under arrest for the crime of ending Jessica Hammond's life. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Diana stood without resistance, holding out her hands for the handcuffs. As the officers led her toward the door, she turned back to face the detectives one final time. "Tell Jessica's family I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know it doesn't change anything, but tell them anyway. She deserved so much better than this, better than me." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Torres and Huang alone in the interrogation room. They sat in silence for a long moment, processing what they'd just witnessed. 15 years on the job, Torres finally said, and these cases never get easier. Huang nodded, gathering up the files and evidence. 2 lives destroyed, 1 ended, 1 ruined. All because someone made a series of bad choices and couldn't find a way back. They left the interrogation room, turning off the lights behind them. In the hallway, they could hear Diana Foster's laughter echoing faintly as the officers processed her into custody. It was a sound that would haunt both detectives for years to come. Not because it was loud or threatening, but because it contained the terrible recognition of someone who had finally admitted to herself what she had become. Diana Foster was formally charged with second-degree intentional harm, resulting in Jessica Hammond's demise. Despite her confession during the interrogation, her attorney mounted a defense arguing diminished capacity due to extreme emotional distress. The trial lasted 6 weeks, during which the jury heard testimony from forensic experts, witnesses who knew both women, and a psychiatrist who evaluated Diana's mental state. On August 15, 2025, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Diana Foster was sentenced to 28 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. During her sentencing hearing, she read a statement apologizing to Jessica Hammond's family and accepting full responsibility for her actions. Jessica Hammond's family established a scholarship fund in her memory at the University of Washington's Foster School of Business, where Jessica had earned her degree. The scholarship supports students pursuing careers in marketing and communications, ensuring that Jessica's creative spirit and passion for the industry continues to inspire future generations. Diana Foster's mother passed away 4 months after Diana's incarceration, never having regained awareness of her daughter's situation. The private care facility released a statement noting that all outstanding fees had been paid through a fund established by anonymous donors, later revealed to be Jessica Hammond's family, who felt that Diana's mother shouldn't suffer for her daughter's crimes. Detective Michael Torres and Detective Lisa Huang continued their work in the Criminal Investigation Division. The Foster case became a teaching example at the police academy, illustrating the importance of thorough financial investigation in cases where motive isn't immediately apparent. The Hammond and Foster Marketing Solutions office building was sold 6 months after the tragedy. The new owners completely renovated the basement level, removing any trace of what had occurred there. The company itself dissolved, with Jessica's share being distributed to her family and Diana's share being seized as part of restitution payments. In the years that followed, Diana Foster participated in several prison rehabilitation programs and eventually earned a certificate in accounting, ironically becoming the person who helped other inmates understand basic financial literacy and avoid the kinds of desperate decisions that had led to her own downfall. She never stopped writing letters to Jessica Hammond's family. Most went unanswered, but occasionally Jessica's younger sister would send a brief response, indicating that while forgiveness remained difficult, acknowledgement of Diana's remorse was noted. The case of Diana Foster and Jessica Hammond served as a stark reminder that violence can emerge from the most unexpected places and that the choices we make in moments of desperation can echo through countless lives in ways we can never fully predict or undo.